Look, I know that I'm preaching to the choir at this point, but late-stage capitalism really has led to the complete and total enshittification of everything in our society, because our entire economy is centered on greed. Corporations whose products have matured aren't satisfied with mere profitability every single year. Simply being in the green isn't enough for them. They have to make more profits than they did the previous year in perpetuity to facilitate endless growth in order to keep their shareholders happy. But the question is, if sales have already peaked and you can only innovate incrementally with new iterations of products, so you're not really able to expand your market share much more, what do you do to still increase profits year after year? Well, maybe you cut corners and make cheaper products and sell them for the same price. Maybe you raise prices and find additional monetization streams, like selling ad space. Perhaps you get your customers to shift to a subscription-based model to milk even more money out of them annually. And internally, you could also do a lot of things. You could stop giving out the annual cost of living raises to your employees, or better yet, just lay them off temporarily to rehire them back at a lower rate once they're so desperate that they'll take anything. You, of course, can also break up their attempts to unionize. Hell, you could just stop hiring employees altogether and treat them as independent contractors so you don't have to give them any benefits. But here's the problem. If every corporation engages in this shitty behavior all to maximize profits, the net effect is that we all pay more for everything and we all make less money. So over time, things get exponentially worse or shitty as the standard of living decreases for everyone. And it's just a death spiral. It's an endless cycle where we circle the drain, and that's where we find ourselves these days. And it's not like politicians will do anything to rein in the greed from these corporations, because at this stage of capitalism, democracy has also been hollowed out as well. So the only real constituents politicians have these days are the billionaires and large multinational corporations that have lobbying power and that can buy them off. A 2014 Princeton University study found that regular Americans have a statistically insignificant impact on policy outcomes, but when you juxtapose them with the policy interests of elites and special interests, well, they're much more likely to get the policy outcomes that they want. Now, ask yourself why that is. Because democracy always devolves into a rich man's game in capitalist societies. Since Citizens United, outside spending has skyrocketed, and dark money in particular surpassed $1 billion in the last election. And that, my friends, in a nutshell, is why everything is getting worse. It's why politicians are doing the opposite of what we want them to do. It's why regulations and consumer protections are being rolled back, because democracy now necessitates the maximization of corporate profits, since the state itself has been captured by the capitalist class. And few industries embody capitalist rot and enshittification like the gaming industry, where greed is causing the entire fucking industry to collapse before our very eyes. Microsoft, for example, they spent years gobbling up so many studios. They acquired Activision Blizzard, Bethesda, Mojang, and after becoming a video game behemoth, what do? They lay off thousands of game developers, even though, as GamesBeat reports, Microsoft profits are up 18% from the previous year. I can only imagine what they're going to do to top that next year. But you see, the problem is that the line has to go up high enough for Xbox specifically. So if that subdivision of this multi-trillion-dollar company doesn't perform well enough, its employees are the ones who are going to have to pay. It doesn't matter that their insufficient success was the result of shitty corporate leadership. I mean, Phil Spencer, the last head of Xbox, is going to get a golden parachute, while the employees get measly severance payments and a feeling of hopelessness and existential dread, because how can you survive in an industry that is this cutthroat? But even being successful in this industry isn't necessarily going to insulate you from layoffs, because as Virginia Glaze of IGN reports, Battlefield 6 was the highest selling game of 2025, beating out Call of Duty Black Ops 7 and NBA 2K26. It sold over 7 million copies in just 3 days and was the best-selling title across both Xbox and PC at the time. However, in March of 2026, just 5 months after celebrating the most successful launch in the Battlefield franchise ever, EA laid off an undetermined number of employees across all its Battlefield teams to, quote, better align itself around what matters most to our community. Now, come July, one of EA's SEC filings have been released, showing that CEO Andrew Wilson's total compensation for the 2026 fiscal year added up to $38.6 million. As pointed out by PC Gamer, this is an $8 million increase from his total compensation from the previous year, and he has Battlefield 6's success to thank for it. So let me get this straight. If you develop a game and it ends up failing, if it doesn't perform well, then you get laid off. But on the other hand, if you do help develop a game that performs well, and even if it's a massive success, guess what happens? You still get laid off because the CEO could project even higher profits by laying you off to impress shareholders and secure himself an even bigger bonus. And if they catch you unionizing in order to try to prevent these abuses from happening, they'll fire you for that too. So there's just no winning no matter what they do. The people who make the games that we all love have to be able to feed themselves and house themselves and clothe themselves and their families. But if they have no financial stability in this industry, they might have no choice but to leave and find work in a field that's less shitty. And think about how much talent these companies are losing, all in the pursuit of short-term profits. Over time, they're not going to have developers to make the games that we want to play because they'll all have moved on to a different industry that exploits them a little bit less. But on the subject of consumers, Gizmodo reports that Xbox is now testing out an ad-based tier for their cloud gaming service. And by test, I just want to be clear, they mean that they're gauging how much money they can make from it, not how intrusive it's going to be or whether or not gamers will like it. They don't give a shit what you want. They just want to see how much money it makes and if it's worthwhile to pursue this particular avenue of revenue. And, if you think that this isn't going to be inevitable, then I've got a bridge to sell you because Amazon's Prime Video service was once ad-free too. But then they unilaterally decided to just impose ads on everyone and forced people to pony up $3 a month extra if they wanted to get rid of the ads. How merciful of them, right? But Microsoft is by no means the only culprit as far as gaming is concerned, because if you'll recall, Nintendo raised prices due to Donald Trump's tariffs. But since the Supreme Court ruled that those tariffs were unconstitutional, Nintendo may now be able to get a refund for the additional costs that they incurred while the tariffs were still in effect. But does that mean that they're going to drop the price or refund gamers who paid more because of the tariffs? Well, of course not. They're actually raising the price of the Switch 2 from $450 to $500, and they're telling their customers expecting a refund to suck their nuts from the back. Forbes reports that consumers filed a class action lawsuit against Nintendo in April, claiming the company, which sued the Trump administration to recoup tariff payments, raised its prices because of the tariffs and would later receive refunds for those levies, effectively allowing the company to collect costs twice. Nintendo, in a motion filed late Monday, argued consumers who sued the firm to receive tariff refunds are not entitled to a rebate and claimed the money they paid for Nintendo products represents the purchase price of the goods they wanted and received. Nintendo's attorneys criticized the lawsuit's argument as meritless, arguing consumers failed to dispute Nintendo's price adjustments as unlawful or that the company misled consumers. Quote, Nintendo or one of its retailers set a price for each product and consumers decided whether that price was worth paying, Nintendo's attorneys wrote. Those who bought Nintendo's products received exactly what they bargained and paid for, a console, a game, and or accessory at a price to which both parties agreed. How thoughtful of Nintendo to tell their biggest fans, early adopters, to eat a bag of dicks. Don't you just love corporations? I love corporations. They're just so awesome, so kind. Now, to be clear, I'm not surprised by any of this. We all knew that this was coming the second that the tariffs were announced, especially after COVID, where the cost of goods increased due to supply chain issues. But once those issues were ironed out, the cost of goods coincidentally stayed the same. In other words, a temporary disruption to the supply chain resulted in a permanent increase in prices. So did anyone expect a different outcome with the tariffs? If anything, you can argue that Trump is actually doing these corporations a favor by imposing tariffs on them because the temporary bump in the cost of goods is going to give them another excuse to permanently raise prices. Not that they need another excuse, because to be clear, they have many, especially in the tech world. Because as Tom's Hardware points out, the AI-induced RAM-apocalypse has caused prices to explode, with some larger RAM kits literally surpassing the cost of most pre-built PCs, which is fucking insane. But the good news is that this presents a new opportunity for corporations to profit off of a solution that they're going to offer to customers. And that solution is you never owning anything ever. I say this because Apple, for example, is letting consumers lease Macs, and it might seem like a great option at face value. You know, you get the product after a credit check, and you don't have to make the first interest-free payment until a month later. So why would this be bad? Well, as PC Magazine points out, it's a lease now, pay forever model that could trap consumers. They explain, as an example, let's look at the cost of leasing the iPhone 17 Pro, which starts at $1,100. Lease prices start at $31.99. So if you lease this phone, you'd have paid $767 after 24 months. So you need to pay another $332 to purchase and keep the phone. If you can't afford to make this large lump sum payment on time, the easiest solution is to lease another device, essentially locking you into another couple of years of monthly payments. Suddenly, you're trapped in an endless cycle of monthly fees for a device you don't even own. And if the Steam Deck is any indication of what we can expect for the next generation of consoles in terms of price, I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox and PlayStation started to offer leasing options as well. And even though that might seem like a more consumer-friendly option on its face, it's a long-term ploy to extract even more money from consumers. And I can assure you, all of these corporations aren't shifting to subscription-only models out of the kindness of their hearts because they're concerned about consumers. They're doing it because it's an easy way to make the money printer go burr and make the line go up in perpetuity. And think about how crazy this is. Large corporations are currently conditioning consumers to be happy owning nothing. And once they get you locked into their ecosystems, they'll be able to milk you for eternity. And that's exactly what the motherfuckers over at PlayStation are doing. So on July 1st, PlayStation announced that they were ending production of physical gaming discs in January of 2028. And they made this decision, mind you, less than a week after they removed more than 500 movies that people had purchased from their digital catalog, which just shows you the audacity that they have. Because right after announcing that they're deleting movies from people's libraries that they purchased because of some licensing deal that had expired that we don't give a shit about, they said, oh, we're going to do that to games too. You can never actually own a digital game. You're just paying for a license, which Sony can revoke anytime they want. And just think about how predatory this is. There's no other storefronts on PlayStation consoles. They're the only game in town. So if you want to play their games on their hardware, you've got to purchase it directly through them. No more third-party vendors, no more used games. You have no choice but to buy from their storefront. And if they so choose to raise prices, well, tough shit, because there's nowhere else to buy their games. So they're taking away that option because they're obviously going to capitalize on having a monopoly. And sure, part of this was driven by industry trends where people were more and more opting for digital over physical. But there's a meaningful difference between digital only on consoles and PC, because on PC, there's multiple digital storefronts. I can buy game keys from virtually any website and purchase video games from Steam or GOG or the Epic Game Store, although let's be real, nobody really buys games from Epic. We, launch the software to download the free game that we never play, and then we relaunch it once again when we see another free game available that we're never going to play. But the point is that there's options, right? There's options, and that makes a big difference. You don't have options on PlayStation unless they're going to make their platform more open and offer additional storefronts. But why would they willingly jeopardize profits by undercutting their own monopoly by opening themselves up to competitors? It would outrage shareholders. They'd never allow it. So they got us right where they want us, which is by the balls, metaphorically speaking. But I will say that it is really encouraging to see gamers finally rise up and take action against corporate greed. And they announced a global blackout of PlayStation products between August 23rd and August 30th, where you just turn off your console or you log out to send a message to Sony. Now, will Sony care? Probably not. But having said that, it's still nice to see gamers do something that actually makes a difference and see them target the real culprits of gaming's decline. Another initiative that's really good is Stop Killing Games. You should look into that. But I say this because it's important that they're targeting the real culprits of gaming's decline, because gaming slop tubers over the years have pontificated endlessly about why gaming is in such a poor state. And their conclusion almost always is it's minorities' fault. Right? They'll conclude that games are getting worse because game developers are more concerned about pandering to women and minorities in lieu of their core audience, and the cost is only increasing because, corporations are spending more money on woke consulting agencies that force diversity in games or some shit. But if you at any point bought that line of horse shit from one of these dipshits, I can assure you the executives of these multi-billion and multi-trillion-dollar companies that we all hate could not be happier, because nothing pleases them more than watching an angry mob of gamers go after minorities for something that their class is doing. Getting the peasants to fight each other is specifically how the capitalist class gets away with all of the shit that they get away with, which is why it's nice to see gamers do something that is actually meaningful for a change and target the corporation itself for the correct reason for once. But the next time that you think to yourself, man, gaming really is in bad shape right now, blame capitalism. It truly is the lowest common denominator, because when you design your entire economy around greed, at a certain point, everything is going to degrade. Everything will break down, including art. And you can't come up with solutions to these problems if you haven't accurately diagnosed the problem in the first place. So just know, it's capitalism. It is truly the root cause of everything wrong with our society.
Luigi not happy.